Welcome to the IonaHoops.com podcast with your host, Guy Flatico.
Season 2, episode 10 of the podcast is here, and it's another jam-packed episode. Clearly, I didn't think this whole video thing through when I made this switch from audio to video. I don't know. All good. Don't worry about it. We'll reassess that stuff during the off-season. And you don't care about my problems anyway. You just want to talk Gale basketball. You're here for your fix. We get it. And I have no interest in disappointing, especially since the Iona Gales are 5-0. Both the Iona Iotas and Offer Roundup will be back in full for the next episode in about 2 weeks. Yes, I said in about 2 weeks because, as I've mentioned ad nauseum on this podcast throughout the entire off season, I'm headed to Orlando for the ESPN event and beyond. So we won't be back here until the calendar hits December. So you're gonna have to live without me for a little bit. I hope you can survive. But what we will be doing is recapping the three most recent Iona wins, and we're going to preview our first two MAC foes, Marist and Ryder. And then we're also going to be welcoming in SEC beatwriter Blake Lovell to help us preview the Orlando event. You guys remember Blake. He's the one who came on to help us preview Iona, Alabama in the NCAA tournament last March. And he was so fantastic, and he called that game pretty exactly about what Iona had to do to hang around. And now he's back for the Iona Alabama rematch and just to preview the tournament in general. So like I said, pretty busy around here, but although what I said about the Iotas and Offer Roundup returning in full in 2 weeks, I'm still going to give you one very important Iota right now.
Iotas.
We'd like to officially welcome Sadiko Io and Keither Florence, who each signed their letters of intent to join the Gales next season. Io is a 6'6" forward from our Savior Lutheran in the Bronx. We've talked about him a good amount on here, and now his paperwork is signed, sealed, and delivered. Just the other day, though, Iona received a commit and signed letter of intent from 6'7" forward Keither Florence. Originally from Kansas and now at Pro Holmes Sports Academy in Tampa. We did cover Florence in a recent Offer Roundup, and apparently it was an offer he couldn't refuse from Rick Pitino, despite other offers recently from schools such as SMU and South Florida. Welcome Sadiko and Keither to Gale Nation. Okay, let's hit the recaps. The Hofstra Pride was just another in a line of visiting foes that presented unique challenges. In this case, insane backcourt firepower. And to make matters worse, Iona played much of this one without Nelly Jr. Joseph, who got in early foul trouble and really wasn't involved in this one until the final minutes. And it didn't really matter. The Gales raced out to a fast start behind a crisp offense led by Tyson Jolly and some timely defense down the stretch. And Iona was able to top Hofstra 82-74. This was a fun one, for sure, because of all the offense going on. Iona's offense was highly efficient, shooting 52% overall, and finally finding that three-point range at a clip of 38%. The free throw shooting kept things interesting, but the defense was good enough in this one. Hofstra shot just 40% from the floor and 34% from three. But those numbers were a bit higher than that until the closing minutes, and this game was still certainly in doubt. Jolly was terrific in this one. He led all scorers of 21. Elijah Joyner nearly had a triple-double, and I didn't even realize it until I saw the box. 9 points, 10 boards, 8 assists, and only 1 turnover. Other Gales stepped up in crucial times in this one. Dylan Van Eyck made back-to-back threes to counter threes by Zach Cooks. And earlier, Jordan Wilde stepped off the bench and made back-to-back threes as well. All in all, this was a great capper to a perfect homestand before the 5-game Florida swing. Here's what Rick Pitino had to say after the win, and also some comments on Elijah Joyner about mental health.
Elijah, Tyson, Quinn, Nelly, Ryan, they're such great people, and they pull for each other so much that they all look up to Elijah. He's the leader, Dylan's the leader, and we've got great leadership out there, but they don't even, my whole post-game speech was how lucky I am as a coach after 40 some odd years to coach you guys because of your attitude. You don't see this today in most games. It's all about, and then Quinn did this. He said, after I told him how proud I am of us, he said, guys, see the stat sheet? And he ripped it in half. We don't care about that. We care about winning. And he ripped up the stat sheet in front of everybody.
When I said that I was happy with basketball, when you're in college, it's a lot of mental health that go on with a lot of things, and I'm a big believer in mental health. And a lot of people don't understand that from the outside looking in. So sometimes, that can be something that can hold you back from something that you love, and it kind of held me back from basketball. So being able to come to New York, which is a new place, meeting new people, having new teammates, and just being comfortable and having my own mental health right is making me fall in love with the game again, and I'm just happy that I'm able to do that.
Last episode, I talked about how the Iona-Harvard game had the feel of two teams battling for a seed line in the NCAA tournament. Iona-Liberty had quite the same feel to it if you watched it. It didn't feel like it early, though, when the Flames got out to a 23-7 lead and the Iona offense just looked out of sorts beyond repair. But this Iona team knows its identity, and the Gales relied on their defense in chipping away to cut the margin to 2 by the half. And after these two mid-major heavyweights really just traded body blows throughout the whole second half, it was Iona who found just enough answers to douse the Flames down the stretch 54-50. Ugly offensive game? Yeah, sure. But it was also the result of beautiful defense on both sides. Style points don't matter in games like this one. Liberty is a top 100 team and one of the best mids out there. After rough first halves, Nelly Jr. Joseph settled in and finished with 14-12, and Quinn Slazinski added 11-7. Elijah Joyner had a nasty hyperextension that Iona fans thinking the worst, but that is one tough kid, and he was back out there soon enough. Let's hear from Pitino and Quinn Slazinski.
When you shoot 27% from the field, 33% from three, 61 from the line, and you win, you're a pretty damn good defensive team. Now, we knew when you play Liberty, you've got to win that defensive battle. No different than when you play Virginia, the old days when you played Wichita State, you've got to win that defensive battle. Pace was going to be slow. I knew that. I sent out a letter to our Gold Club, an email stating that this would be like going to the dentist, and it was. We knew that, but we didn't let up down the stretch down 4. We made big plays, and that was the key to the game.
Yeah, I couldn't shoot a ball in the ocean the first half, and in any other program, I would have not seen the floor the rest of the game. But to have Coach Pitino keep telling me you better not stop shooting the ball, so you better not quit taking shots. You better keep shooting and let that thing fly, and they'll drop. And they did the second half, and I'm grateful that I had him, in my ear. My teammates, I love my teammates to death. I'd do anything for them, and for them to keep telling me same thing. You better not stop shooting. So just like that, it just gives me confidence to knock those down.
After toppling Liberty in the MAC ASUN Challenge's premier event, a slow start for the Gales against North Alabama was a strong possibility. Indeed, Iona did not play with a ton of energy on either end of the floor in the first half, and the Gales managed just a 38-35 lead at the break. Thankfully, the energy was there in the second half, and Iona overwhelmed the Lions the rest of the way in the 81-65 win. The Gales led by as many as 26 in this one, behind a defense that allowed just 31% shooting overall and 13% shooting from 3. Meanwhile, Iona was 9 of 14 from 3 and 20 of 27 from the line in the win. Slazinski, Jolly, Nelly, and Dillon were the stars for the Gales, who were without Elijah Joyner for this one as a precaution after the knee hyperextension against Liberty. We're going to hear from Pitino and Jolly next, and then we're going to go right into our previews. We're actually going to jump ahead and preview our 2 games after the Orlando tournament, the MAC games against Ryder and Marist. Marist and Ryder in that order. And then we'll go back to the Orlando tournament, and we'll also welcome in our guest at that time. But right now, let's hear from Pitino and Jolly about the win against North Alabama and looking ahead.
Colton Cashaw had to step in for Elijah, so we had another person running the offense. I feel like we got used to playing with each other, got used to getting to spots, and I didn't feel like it was so much of a hangover. I feel like we wasn't as focused as we should have been, and they came out hard, ready to play. They came off a loss, and they have nothing to lose, and we have everything to lose. So, we had to come out in the second half and be more aggressive and try to put them away and not give them any hope.
Tyson, how fired up are you for the next 3 games you have in Orlando?
Man, I'm very excited. You know, I can't wait to get some rest, go watch some film, figure out more about this Alabama team we're going to play, and you know, going into these games is really big. We're 5-0 right now, and a win on Thursday would be big, and then a win Friday and Saturday would be even bigger. So I feel like as a team, we're ready. As a coaching staff, they're going to get us prepared, and I feel like this is a great opportunity, and I feel like the team and myself is ready for it.
The great thing about being 5-0, if I could just be objective, is we're nowhere near our potential. And anytime you have 8 new players, Tyson Jolly, and then we had to play without Joyner tonight. Obviously, Quinn Selinsky is new. Anytime you have new players that play major minutes, it just takes a little bit of time. We're getting better. We're taking baby steps to get better, much better offensively tonight. And the one common denominator that's been consistent is the way we defend the 3. This is a team that makes 9 threes per game, and tonight they were 2 for 16. So that's good defense, doing a nice job in that area almost every game. Well, Alabama is, you know, it's like some of my Louisville teams. You can change the parts, but you're still going to have a great team. It's their system of they're not going to take 2-point shots. They're going to get to the rim. They're going to get fouled. They're going to shoot threes. They're going to be very aggressive defensively. Last year, we played them real close, but then they got after Isaiah Ross, made it very difficult for us to score. Obviously, we have more weapons this year in scoring. So, but we know what they do. They're very gifted. They're a top 15 team in the nation. We know it'll be a tough game, but every game in that tournament is going to be tough. You know, every game. You know, that's a loaded basketball tournament, and we're going to get a chance to see. We made this. That's one of the reasons why we made the first 5 games so difficult schedule-wise, is to get ready for this classic.
After Orlando, the Gales are going to return home and open up MAC play on Wednesday, December 1st against Marist. Some folks expected some big things from Red Foxes this year, but thus far, that has not quite materialized. It appears the Marist defense, expected to be team strength, has been inconsistent at best thus far. Marist has been pretty good offensively this season, shooting it pretty well in general, but as I said, we're just not seeing John Dunn's trademark defense just yet. Maybe a flash here and there, but not really. The Foxes led primarily by the guard tandem of Raheem Sullivan and Ricardo Wright, with Jordan Jones the best of their bigs thus far. Iona and Marist did not meet last season due to COVID, so this is going to be the first meeting between Dunn and Pitino. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you've heard me perhaps buck the trend a bit with my placement of Ryder as Iona's primary challenger, ranking them second in the MAC in preseason. That may still come to pass, but thus far Ryder is underwhelmed with the 2-3 start. Last year, Ryder's 11th place finish was primarily due to some rather porous defense, and Kevin Baggett doesn't appear to have shored things up very much on that end of the floor thus far this season. Those who doubted Ryder entering the season wanted to know who would step up alongside Dwight Murray and Demencio Vaughn to turn the Bronx around, and thus far we still don't have an answer. But on top of the issues on defense, Ryder's just having a real hard time shooting as well. Baggett has a lot of work to do if Ryder is going to be where I had projected. We'll see if they made any progress when they visit New Rochelle on Friday, December 3rd. Have I mentioned I'm going to Disney for the ESPN Events Invitational in Orlando? Yeah, like once an episode at least. Well, I couldn't miss this one. What a field and what an opportunity for my Gales. Just take a look at this bracket. Now, I'm going to say some of you may recall me complaining about our matchup, assuming that some sort of seeding took place when they made the bracket, and this setup suggests that Iona is the 7th best team in the field if you consider Kansas number 1 and Alabama number 2. Iona is not the 7th best team in this field. I said it during the summer. I'm saying it even more now. So now more than ever, this bracket stinks. But it is what it is, as the cliche goes, so we press on. A Thanksgiving treat for Iona fans as the Gales will be taking on Alabama, and of course, a rematch of last season's NCAA game. We're going to have more on this one in a bit with our guests, but let's just say that Alabama appears every bit as good as last year's team thus far. The Tide's off to a 4-0 start behind names we might recall from last March, of course, Shackelford and Quinterly, and probably a couple others as well. As good as Iona's been thus far, this, of course, will be our toughest test in a non-conference slate, and the Gales are going to need a gem to win this one. Let's take a quick moment to glance at our two potential opponents in the second round, Belmont and Drake. Both are strong mid-majors, a common theme for the Gales non-conference slate on the whole for sure this season, and either would pose yet another stiff test. The Belmont Bruins are a high-powered offensive unit with lots of weapons to stretch a defense. They lost their opener at another tough mid-major, Ohio, and they get another tough test prior to Orlando when they visit LSU. As for Drake, the Bulldogs are undefeated this year so far, with a home win versus Richmond, their toughest outing to date. Drake is another team that's filled up the basket at an alarming rate thus far. Geez, we should have bet the over on the meeting in their meeting in Orlando, huh? I mean, really, this is silly. But what's not silly is our next segment of this program. We welcome in our guest, Blake Lovell. Well, now we have the honor of welcoming back a guest that you guys may recall from last March. It's Blake Lovell from he's a Blue Ribbon yearbook editor, and he's also editor of Southeastern14.com. He's an SEC beat writer now for quite a while. And as you guys, again, like I said, he was on with us last year to preview Iona, Alabama. And guess what? As soon as that bracket came out, I knew who was going to come on with me one more time to preview Iona and Alabama. Blake, welcome back.
Yeah, very convenient, isn't it? We set this up. We don't want to let everyone know, but we're actually the ones that demanded to have the rematch. That way we could get back together here and talk some basketball. So,
well, what was your first thought when you did see the bracket? It's like, are you surprised that they put them back against each other, or not really?
I think it's always an interesting thing, that they obviously know what they're doing with some of these matchups. And this is, of course, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm sure we could find instances where they've done this before, where you have these kind of sort of matchups the following year. And of course, sometimes those games are just scheduled out as separate games. But within a tournament, I always find it fun to just go back and say, all right, well, you guys just had a tournament game here. Let's do it again, 8 months later, and let's see how it goes. So, yeah, it's one of those things. And I think actually I enjoy that more. Like, that's fine. Like, let's see where these teams are at after playing each other 8 months ago that don't normally play each other every year. I'm fine with that. I think it adds more intrigue. So,
yeah. So let's go back to last year's NCAA tournament game. We had a good preview, and I think we kind of nailed it for the most part. We kind of talked about how Iona can hang around and how maybe they couldn't. And I think we kind of nailed that exactly. Tell me about what you thought about as that game was taking place last year.
Yeah, I remember we had that discussion, and that was one of the things we said is, for Iona, you had to get off to a good start because just the way Alabama shot the ball, it's just they're a hard team to, I think, rally against. And, it kind of happened for a little bit there. I mean, it was, we obviously look at where things were at halftime, and really until, that final stretch, you felt like they were right there with a chance to at least put themselves in a position to win. And, the other thing we said is, hey, you just, honestly, you got to play good defense. You got to hope Alabama doesn't make a lot of threes, and they didn't. And so, that was one of those games that, I mean, we talked about it like that. To me, was one of those where if Alabama can get by this, which that first round game and that setting, and, Patino's on the other sideline, and you just got all these different elements in play, it was going to be a little bit of pressure off a team like Alabama that, quite frankly, had not been in that spot in a long time. Especially no one in that particular team had been there before in that setting, as that high of a seed. So I think it was one of those games that, you kind of knew that it was, you were going to be more surprised than not if Alabama came out and won that game by 30 plus, and that just didn't happen. So.
Yeah. And typical for a small school fan like myself, when you see an Iona lose to an Alabama, it's like, well, Alabama's great. They're going to go to Final Four. Yeah. How disappointing, was it to not go to a Final Four in your mind for Alabama?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was one of those things where, unfortunately, it's what the NCAA tournament does to teams every single season. It's all about the matchup. It's all about playing the wrong person at the wrong time. And as we know, I mean, for Alabama, they caught a UCLA team that just willed themselves into the spot that they got to. And that was kind of the name of the game. Alabama had every opportunity to win that game. And, it was just one of those things where it was UCLA's tournament for the most part. And just, they were such a big story coming out of it. Of course, Baylor wins the whole thing, but I mean, they were just such a huge part of that tournament in and of itself. And one of those where it's like, oh, you run into UCLA and here they go. And they made their moves. And you just had one of those games where, Alabama didn't shoot the ball well from outside. And that's kind of what we talked about with them is, that's the style they play. And if there are games where they don't make a ton of shots from outside, you could have those kind of games. And especially, we just saw UCLA sort of take that game over. Alabama rallied, put themselves in a position, obviously the big shot to send it to overtime. But I mean, it was just one where luck of the draw, you play the wrong team at the wrong time. That's what they ran into. So.
So we have a new season now upon us. Alabama still has a lofty ranking, still has a ridiculous amount of talent. The recruiting level is through the roof there. So let's talk about their roster now. Who's gone? Inform Iona fans who's gone, who's not, and who should we look for that's new?
Yeah, well, I mean, the big two we know that are gone, and it's obviously there were more guys involved, that played supporting roles and such, but. Not having John Petty and Herbert Jones, I mean, those two guys were, such staples of the program to get it to this point, to be kind of the guys who pushed Alabama basketball into this new stratosphere. And of course, Petty's shooting, we all know that was kind of his forte and just what he was able to do at any time from outside. And then Herbert Jones, just, SEC player of the year, just complete player in every facet for the most part. Obviously a significantly better defensive player, but that's not to knock his offensive game, but he made everything go on defense. And I think that's actually, what you look at with this current team is they're not shooting necessarily great from three. I think they're shooting 33%, something like that thus far as a team from outside. And it's through 3 games. I think that's always, such a small sample size. It's hard to get a full feel on that, but this is still going to be a good shooting team. Like they're going to wind up shooting the ball pretty well, I'd say, by season's end. And we know some of that's just going to be bulk. Like they're just going to shoot so many from outside that they will make some of those, and those add up pretty quick. Threes add up more than twos. And Nate Oates is a math wizard, and he understands that. So I think that is an element with this team. Right now, I don't think you can say this is as good of a shooting team as last year's team by any means. But when you look at the guys they have coming back, right? Jaden Shackelford, Javon Quinterly, Keon Ellis, those guys in particular, Quinterly, Shackelford, they're SEC player of the year types. I mean, they'll both be in the running if Alabama wins the SEC or is even close. I think just based on, their experience, they'll play 30 plus minutes a game and be the leaders in the backcourt. And as we know with the Nate Oates team, the backcourt's going to drive everything. But what Alabama does have now is they have some size to go along with it. And I think that's going to be important for this team. I mean, you look at some of the guys that they also have, like someone, for example, like a Darius Miles, who is 6'6", kind of a good forward type player, but they also have a Charles Bediako, who's just a very, huge kid that at the center position gives them more size at 7 foot than they had last year. So they do have more size and ability, I think, to maybe protect the rim, rebound a little bit better maybe this season. And look, they've got the depth, right? I mean, that's what we always talk about with Alabama. If you're Nate Oates, you're playing the style you're playing, you got to have depth. And that's where, you have a 5-star freshman like J.D. Davison, who, will be an SEC freshman of the year candidate, Jawan Gary, guys like that. And so this is still a very similar Alabama team to what it was last year. But, do they have the shooting? There's still some things I think they need to figure out in terms of ball handling. I mean, they did turn it over, I think it's 22 times against South Alabama. So those are some things that I think if you're Iona, you look at and saying, all right, how can we exploit a couple of those areas?
Mm. So basically you said, in terms of how Alabama is better than they were a year ago, they got more size, a little more depth, and maybe in terms of how they might be not quite as good, shooting may not be quite as good, and maybe not as good in terms of protecting the ball. Anything else on either side of the ball that you want to mention that could be something Iona fans should look for?
I do think that, again, because perhaps they won't be as just dominant shooting from outside at times, I do think they can find ways to be much more efficient inside. Now, again, is that going to be because they have more size? That probably is an element to it. But because they do have Quinterly and Shackelford kind of leading the way, whereas Petty was someone, he was a very spot up three type guy. Like he could take you off the dribble, but a lot of his points would come just, all right, Quinterly or Shackelford, penetrates, kicks out to Petty, he knocks down a three. You've got guys that can knock down threes, but I think because you do have kind of this two-headed monster of Shackelford and Quinterly, they are going to be able to hit shots from outside, but they're also so good off the dribble to where I think that's going to allow them to perhaps get some more points and be more efficient, maybe scoring inside and getting to the rim. And look, you're still going to have those opportunities to kick out for threes because those two guys are, I think, just good enough, again, off the dribble to be able to do that. And you've basically got 2 point guards on the floor, but they're not your traditional sort of point guards. They're guys who can do pretty much everything that you need them to do. So that is a challenge. I think that will be a challenge all season long for teams, just kind of preparing for those two in particular. But then again, a Keon Ellis type who at 6'6" guard, you've got guys like that too who are really going to help out. So I think that is something to where they'll be able to make up if they're not as good of a 3-point shooting team. And I don't necessarily know that they're going to be, but that's not to say that they don't have guys that will be able to knock down threes on a very consistent basis.
Mm. So it's always an interesting way to look at it. It's just now you have teams that went at it in the NCAA tournament last year. You have a Rick Pitino who game planned for Alabama, and now he's got another shot. So looking at it from two ways, looking at this from the Iona's perspective, Alabama's roster is a little different, but it is still Rick Pitino evaluating it. How much can the tape from last year really help? But on the flip side, Iona's pretty different than what Alabama saw last year. We're deeper. There's more size. Not as reliant on the 3-point shot. More physical than last year's team, maybe. So looking at last year's tape versus this year's Iona team may not be as much a help. Is that an advantage for Iona, or am I just overthinking it?
No, I think to a certain extent it certainly is. Because, that is something that goes into it because like we said, it is such a unique setup where you do have the same two teams playing each other, this early in the season based off of playing each other at the end of the season last year. And so you do have some sort of, I think, way to navigate around that and use that because, we talked about those two guys. I think Herbert Jones was obviously the best player on the floor for Alabama in that game last year against Iona, but you also had Petty and Shackelford played pretty well. I think remembering off the top of my head for the most part, Quinterly probably didn't play bad either, but you're able to, I think, look at the tendencies of those kind of guys because really, we remember we talked about it, like outside of those four guys, like Alabama did not necessarily play that great and they were not able to do a whole lot. So I think that can at least give you some sort of, at least you can scout different tendencies with Shackelford and Quinterly and some of those other guys as well. Why didn't Keon Ellis maybe play as well as he could have perhaps and not be as much of a factor on the offensive side? Like you can study those kind of things and figure that out. But, there are, the two big guys, of course, that were there last year too, Alex Reese, Jordan Bruner, they're not there. And so I think those are things like, all right, well, now you got to prepare for a Charles Bediako, a 7-foot kid that's a freshman. You've got to prepare for a 5-star freshman in JD Davison, who, again, will be a pure stud as a freshman in the SEC. So those are things that you can't necessarily take away from last year. But there are some things knowing that the guys who are going to lead the way from Alabama, the duo of Shackelford and Quinterly, you've at least got something you can study off of that. And by the way, I would probably study some of the stuff perhaps against South Alabama too, because like I said, they did struggle with ball handling on that. So that could play into it as well.
Yeah, and even on the defensive line, Iona does things a little differently because we have more depth last year and because no practice time with COVID and everything. Patino just played a straight man-to-man, and that's all he did last year. And now we're seeing the Patino presses coming out in these first couple of games that Iona is starting to use it. The last game, they pretty much pressed for 40 minutes. So that might be good or bad against a team like Alabama. We don't know yet. That could, it could open some doors for Alabama they didn't even have last year against us because we played such good half-court defense. So, I'm curious to see how that plays out. So let's switch to the bracket a bit here. Obviously, when they made this bracket, ESPN, it's a television event. They want to gear it so Kansas and Alabama are in the finals. Hard to see a scenario where that does not happen, to be honest. Even as an Iona fan, hate to say that, but it's true. But do you see? Let's talk about each of the matchups real quick. Let's go on the other side real quick. Kansas, North Texas, Dayton, Miami. I'm assuming you agree. Dayton actually hasn't looked good at all this year. Miami's okay, but any reason to believe Kansas isn't going to be in the finals?
Yeah, that's hard to see on that side, isn't it? Because like you said, Dayton has not played very well, and Miami's solid, but they're not on Kansas's level. So yeah, I think you'd be surprised other than Kansas coming out of that side, I would say.
Yeah. And then on our side, we have on the other half of our bracket, we have Belmont and Drake. It's two mid majors. Again, Alabama got the mid major side of the bracket here for sure. I think Drake could be a pain in the neck in that next round for Alabama if it's them, or obviously for Iona if Iona happens to beat Alabama. So Belmont, of course, is good too. So any thoughts on this side of the bracket?
Yeah, it's funny because if I'm Alabama or Iona, I probably would have preferred the other side of the bracket, because I think those two, you said it. I mean, if you're Alabama and Iona and you don't play well in this tournament, and you know that you've got one of those two teams next, I mean, that's either way you look at it. Like Belmont, I mean, I'm a huge Casey Alexander fan. I just, what he did at Lipscomb now, Rick Byrd, has just kind of mentored him his whole entire career as a player and a coach, and now he's there at Belmont, and you know what you're getting. They're going to be very efficient. They just come off a good win against Furman earlier in the week. And, Drake, like you said, Drake is very impressive too. So I don't love, those matchups either way for Alabama or Iona. I think that is definitely a very hard to predict part of the bracket there at the bottom, because those two teams, Belmont and Drake, if would I be shocked if either one of those two teams were playing Kansas perhaps in that championship? Absolutely not, because I think both of them are perhaps that good.
And it's strange because, when the brackets came out, I'm figuring, well, they did see these teams 1 through 8 in some way. And, doing the numbers, you would say, well, Iona must have been the 7th choice here. And I'm like, oh, they're not the 7th best team in this field. And it's so hard to prove it because they're playing Alabama in the first round.
Yeah.
So in my mind, if Iona plays well and loses to Alabama, they would get the Belmont Drake loser. I would think we both kind of think it might be Belmont. Then Iona wins that game, and you get maybe Miami in the next game. Iona going 2-1 in this tournament would be tremendous for them. It was a good loss to Alabama. Yeah. So we'll see how that all plays out. But no, I agree with you. I do think our side of the bracket's a little heavier. I don't know how good North Texas has been playing. I haven't followed that closely, but I know they lost a lot from last year's team. So yeah, I think our side of the bracket's a little tougher to begin with for sure. So just if you had to take a guess on what you think this Alabama team is going to evolve into by the end of the year, again, is it a team that looks like they could not maybe be missing that element that would prevent them from making any kind of real run? Or do you think, well, maybe this team, if everything falls right, could really be a special one come March?
Yeah, I tell you, and I think we're going to know exactly the answer to that within the next 3 weeks, because not only this tournament, we talk about this one in particular, Iona, other possible matchups, but then, for Alabama, you've got your most important stretch of the season that's not in SEC play, and that's Gonzaga, Houston, and Memphis. And those 3 games, I think, will tell us a lot about what can Alabama be, what can they evolve into, because I do think that they have, again, 2 of the best players in the SEC leading the way, but this is a team that's made up differently than the one last season. And I think it's kind of gotten to that point to where you kind of give Nate Oates the benefit of the doubt that they will figure out any issues they have. Maybe they'll figure out some of the, turnover problems. They'll come back and be just fine. But I think there are things that we will learn a lot about with them over the next 3 weeks or so, just based on the schedule, because they went out and intentionally said, we're going to go out and do what we've been doing. That schedule very tough in the non-conference. And I mean, when you look at those 3 opponents in particular, and look, like we said, perhaps we can play Kansas in here before you get to that. So theoretically, you could play Kansas, Gonzaga, Houston, and Memphis all in a row in 4 straight games. I mean, that is just absurd when you think about it. So that, I think, will tell us a lot about what the Crimson Tide are going to be this season.
All right. Well, I certainly appreciate you coming on again. I don't think they'll make Iona and Alabama play again in the NCAA tournament this year, assuming that Iona can get there. It's safe bet Alabama will be there, but you never know. So who knows? We could have you on again in March, or maybe again, like we were, Patino and Nate Oates are buddies now. Maybe we have a 1-for-1 going on somewhere down the line where Iona's down in Alabama. Then the next year you guys are up at the Garden, and you can come up and visit, and we can hang out and talk hoops live and in person. So we'll see how it goes, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing some Alabama knowledge with us again. And we hope to catch up with you again down the line.
Yeah, I always enjoy it, and hopefully for our sake, they will make this a regular series just so they can hear us talk basketball. That would be great. So
That's awesome. All right, take care. Good for basketball. For that, I'm so happy it's
Yes.
back, and this is great. I'm going down to Orlando. I'm pumped. So this is going to be a good time. And thanks again for coming on, and we'll see you soon.
Sounds great. Always enjoy it. Thanks.
5-0. That's a hell of a start to this season with all sorts of battles along the way so far. And it's now about to get real with the ESPN tournament, followed by our first 2 MAC games. I'm going to Disney World, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Go Gales.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the IonaHoops.com podcast. This podcast is a production of IonaHoops.com and its publisher Guy Filatico. The opinions shared during this podcast are those of Guy Filatico, IonaHoops.com, and any featured guests. This podcast is not affiliated with Iona College Athletics or the college itself. Thank you for supporting IonaHoops.com.